Antonovsky's 100th anniversary. I'm Georg Bauer. I'm chair of the Global Working Group on Salutogenesis and also of the Center of Salutogenesis, which is hosting STARS, the Society for Theory and Research on Salutogenesis. This society, together with our Global Working Group, has put together this webinar for this special important event today. Now you might ask, well, the anniversary of Aaron Antonovsky already has been actually nearly a year ago, actually on December 19th, 2023. Why are we holding it now? We certainly did have planned it really for this real date a year ago, but before we really could announce it, unfortunately, this terrible attack happened in Israel, and we all clearly felt that in this very really horrible times where really people in Israel, where this concept of salutogenesis emerged, really live in such a state of deep shock and suffering, it would not be a good time to have this webinar a year ago. Certainly, we discussed also now, is it now the right time? The conflict in this region still is not over. It even worsened, I think, heavily over the last year and even enlarged, really reaching many more groups in the region by now. But we think if we really wait for full peace in the Middle East and even beyond on our planet, then we can probably wait for a long time. So this is why I thought now it's time to have the celebration. Actually, it's the last day of the anniversary year, at least, where we made it for this event. I think that's still a nice way to have it. Yeah, I mean, why do we convene today? It's really time to acknowledge the person of Aaron Antonovsky, who was so bright and I would also say so brave to offer really a paradigm shift how we look at health by suggesting not to look at the origin of health in the sense of disease, but really at the origin of health as a more positive endeavor in our life. I think the recent developments in the field of salutogenesis, such as the Handbook of Salutogenesis, the regular international conferences we have on this topic, but also the membership in our Society of Theory and Research on Salutogenesis, which are 2,700 members by now, really illustrates how really alive this concept is, and it's really time to also celebrate the founder. Before I will introduce this program in more detail of today, I would now like to immediately share a short film where actually Aaron Antonovsky himself explains how he came to look into the other direction of the origin of health. I think sharing and enjoying this rare documentary piece is a real nice way to start our celebration. So Martin, please share this film. Sound is not working, I think.
You're an idiot. You're looking in the wrong place. What was I looking at? I was comparing 74% to 22%. P is very, very significant. And that's what we go on doing. How many people die? How many people get sick? How many people are poorly adapted? And so on. And it suddenly struck me. This was the important thing. And if this were 2% instead of 26, it would still be the important thing. Because what does this mean? These are women who went through the most unimaginable hell in human existence and then had a very easy life, despite personal camps, of being interned by the British in Cyprus, of the War of Independence, of a period of austerity, of another 3 or 4 wars by 1969, of their husbands and children going off to war, just to put the highlights of the relaxed life that we live in Israel. And yet they were doing well. Reasonably well. It suddenly struck me that was the question to ask. And we never asked. And because you never ask a question, you don't know anything about the answers. We all work, and I sum up the meaning of the salutogenic question, because that's the name can give it. The origins of health. We had all, including myself, for some 20 years in my research, we had all been studying, and I stress again, the biological researchers, the epidemiological researchers, social science researchers, had all been studying, looking for answers to what I call the pathogenic question. It's the origins of pathology. And that's what I started out looking for. Testing the hypothesis that stressors lead to pathology.
Okay, thank you very much for sharing this film, Martin. I think this film really shows how Aaron Antonovsky really was a person who really was thinking deeply through this question of the origin of health for himself, and really could sense also the energy and engagement he developed around this question, and also how he really conveyed that to the audience, also the process he has been going through for himself. I think after that nice start, I would now like to, as I announced, introduce the program. Um, in the first part, we really want to get a deeper insight into Aaron Antonovsky, the man behind the concept of salutogenesis. And we do so by showing a dialogue between Avishai Antonovsky and Shifra Shegi, whom I will introduce in a minute. And after that dialogue, you also will have some time to ask questions about Aaron Antonovsky and this origin of health question. Then we take a break, and after that break, we go into a second part where we really look into more recent developments, current developments in salutogenesis. We will present these developments, 4 of them, and discuss what Antonovsky might have thought about that. And that part will be moderated by Margaret Daniels, who also organized this webinar. And I really would like to thank her already now a lot for really her engagement for this whole webinar series, including this anniversary webinar. So now coming to this dialogue, I would like to briefly introduce the 2 speakers. The one is Avishai Antonovsky. He is the son of Aaron Antonovsky, so naturally has the most closest insight into Aaron Antonovsky, whom he could accompany as a son through his life. And it also needs to emphasize that since then, really, Avishai also became a very prominent scholar within the field of salutogenesis and really is making a lot of contributions to our field in the last years, where he also joined us in our global working group. Shifra Shegi, she had been the only PhD student of Aaron Antonovsky, certainly many years ago by now. And she accompanied Aaron really in this journey of really looking into this other direction and really developing the salutogenic model of health in the first place. But she also has been continuing to do her own research with this concept over the last decades on a very urgent topic, relevant topic on conflict studies, where you can really learn a lot about how salutogenesis can also be applied to such challenging situations. Both actually are also very active members of our global working group on salutogenesis and really contribute in this role heavily for the advancement and dissemination of the concept. Now, again, we will actually share a video that might sound strange, but the reason is that we really, for the conference, 6th International Conference of Salutogenesis, we had invited the 2 of them to enter a dialogue about Aaron Antonovsky, and fortunately we recorded that. And this, I think, dialogue is so touching and also getting so close to Aaron Antonovsky that we really think that's the right way to go also today for this anniversary celebration, to get an even better, closer feeling of Aaron Antonovsky by these 2 very close friends and son of Aaron Antonovsky. So we start the next film.
Welcome everybody and we are glad very much that you are here with us. I would like to introduce myself. I'm a professor emerita of social psychology and educational psychology at Ben-Gurion University of the Negev, and I'm one of the editors of the Handbook of Salutogenesis that most of you must know it.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Avishai Antonovsky. I'm glad to be here with you. Too bad it's only on Zoom. I would prefer face-to-face. I'm a social psychologist. I work mainly in the area of mental health promotion, based mostly on salutogenic theory. I also play the piano, and I'm an amateur, although quite serious photographer. As you can see, Schiffer and I are sitting in our gardens, and the garden was one of Aaron Antonovsky's favorite places. It was a very important hobby for him, and I'll get back to that later in our discussion.
So Professor Antonovsky, or Aaron as he would prefer that we call him, was a father figure for both of us. For you, Avishai, as his only child, and for me, I was his only doctoral student many years ago.
Mm-hmm. We would like to discuss a few issues and tell some stories that can teach us something about Aaron and his inseparable aspects of his personal, ideological, and professional life. We will do this by raising questions and not necessarily answering them, but rather use them as starting points for sharing some insights and perhaps stimulating some thoughts. After all, Aaron always said that the questions are more important than the answers. Good question, he used to say, bring good answers. The first question we would like to ask about Aaron's life actually has to do with his passing. In 1994, at the age of 71, he died prematurely. At what point in his life did he allow himself to leave us, and why? And is there any meaning in the fact that he was diagnosed with cancer only 7 weeks before he died, suffering no physical pain? Shifra, what is your theory?
I will try to say my theory. When Aaron was diagnosed and admitted to the hospital, he was in the midst of some very fruitful academic work. In those days, we had already completed a large-scale study on retirees. I was his doctoral student and the coordinator of this research. The data of this study gave a very strong empirical support to his new ideas of salutogenesis and to the new construct of sense of coherence. We had already published some papers based on this data, and Aaron started to feel that he's posing the new revolutionary question of salutogenesis and coining the new term of sense of coherence became much more accepted. This was after he had completed his two classic books, Health, Stress, and Coping in 1979, and Unraveling the Mystery of Health in 1987, but still felt, and I quote him, a strong sense of isolation. Moreover, we had just been awarded a small grant to study the origins of the development of sense of coherence, which became a very crucial question after discovering the powerful predictive value of sense of coherence towards health. So from the academic point of view, we can say that Aaron could allow himself to leave us as he felt that his revolutionary ideas that posed a fundamentally different philosophical assumption about the world had become much more accepted.
He felt satisfied from the family point of view as well. After retiring, he and my mother Helen moved back to their old house in Jerusalem, where they could live closer to their grandchildren whom they very much love. So on the one hand, he had so many more things to do. On the other hand, he had a fulfilling life full of accomplishments. On the day that he died, when he understood that it was the end, he said, "I'm leaving the world with utmost satisfaction."
I watched him during his short time of illness and strongly felt his refusal to accept the role of being sick. Would being sick have contradicted his theory given that he had a strong sense of coherence? This raises or brings us to our second question about Aaron that we wish to discuss here. Did he really have a strong sense of coherence? Relating to this question, we will look at the three components of sense of coherence. The first is comprehensibility. He developed a clear view of the challenges he faced and could predict future ones. Aaron had very crystallized ideas that you can easily learn in his books and papers. He was also led by a very strong ideology with clear values and clear rules. This was expressed in his research work as well as in his leadership in the Department of Sociology of Health at Ben-Gurion University, where I served. He was very strict and demanding when it came to academic work. I was personally challenged by this in writing my doctoral dissertation, and even now, some 30 years later, I still keep working in this way. Aaron was an ideologist in his political and social life as well. As a socialist, he kept searching for equality among people. This was reflected, for example, on the social, less formal level. He took part in our department duties, such as washing dishes or baking cakes for Friday departmental meetings.
I heard he once baked a grapefruit cake because that was the only fruit he had at home. Apropos informality, I was told that his first secretary would call him Professor Antonovsky, and that drove him crazy. "We work together, call me Aaron," he demanded. And there are other examples. For instance, he wore sandals in the summer and never wore a tie, unlike most people in his status. Suzanne Kobesa, who developed the theory of hardiness, once told me about a meeting she had with Aaron in 1982 at his parents' home in New York. She said, "Aaron was dressed informally, an army-like khaki shirt. I've seen this kind of shirt, but usually in films in a desert area, not in the streets of Brooklyn or Chicago. I wore a suit," she said, "but his outfit was more appropriate for the summer heat that day. I looked more or less like I thought that a young lecturer should look like at a meeting with a senior scholar."
As for manageability, the other component of sense of coherence, he found the resources, educational, economic, social, physical, mental, to cope with the challenges he posed. Mostly, as he said, he inherited the resistant resources from his parents, and he knew how to use them.
Schiffer, what about your claim regarding the most important component of the sense of coherence, meaningfulness? And how was that expressed in Aaron's life?
I agree. Meaningfulness is the most important component of sense of coherence, as I understand it. When Aaron talked with me about this component of sense of coherence, I told him about Viktor Frankl, who survived the concentration camps during the Holocaust. I gave him the book, The Meaning of Life. Aaron was very excited to get to know this little book. He agreed with me that this component of sense of coherence is the most powerful. I trust Aaron's life was meaningful in every aspect. You, Avishai, will tell us later about the small family which was so important to him. I saw it in his dedication to the scientific work and his courage to introduce a completely new paradigm to the pathogenic-oriented science. He was so brave in his dedication to ask new questions. It was not easy. Most of all, his life story reveals a real authentic idealist with a strong sense of commitment to his ideals. For many years, Aaron was an active figure in the left-wing struggle in Israel. Actually, we first met in these circles of peace activists. Our last meeting outside the hospital was in an exciting happening near Gaza after the Rabin Arafat meeting during the Oslo Accords. We both were so excited to hear the peace bells. We saw there are peace bells. Perhaps it was a good point for Aaron to leave the world. You all know how this hopeful, brave step of Rabin's has ended.
Well, there's still hope. We shouldn't lose hope. For me, he found a great deal of meaning in his family as well. I was a teenager in the 70s when Aaron was busy setting up the medical school and teaching students the meaning of being a good doctor. First of all, compassion. And he was writing his first book describing the salutogenic model, health, stress, and coping. Nonetheless, when he was at home, evenings and weekends, he devoted himself to the family. He would sit after supper with my mother, Helen, in the living room after washing the dishes, read a book, and sometimes fall asleep, or engage in a family conversation. He loved museums, music, going on hikes, and working in the garden. I don't know if you can hear the birds here in the background. Anyway, this is where he would like to be right now, in the garden. I remember one day, after having planted some bushes in the garden, he looked at them and said, "I'm no expert gardener, but I can easily explain why some plants fail to grow and die. The big mystery," he said, "is how some plants do stay healthy and survive the desert heat and dryness." 10 years later, he wrote his second book, Unraveling the Mystery of Health. Perhaps he was talking about plants. Who knows?
I'm sure he was talking about them. So it seems then that Aaron did have a strong sense of coherence. But as far as comprehensibility, which involves some degree of confidence in knowing what the future would look like, I'm not sure he would have been able to see in the best of his dreams that 27 years after he passed away, there would already be a second edition of the Handbook of Salutogenesis and a sixth international conference on salutogenesis. I'm sure he would be happy to see it.
I'm sure. I agree with you. He would be delighted to know how it turned out. After all, he didn't think of his theory as a perfect model of how things were. He saw it as just the beginning, a fruitful starting point.
So thank you all for listening to us. Comments are very welcome. We would also like to refer to the Handbook of Salutogenesis, where Avishai and I have a chapter on Aaron Antonovsky, the scholar and the man. Those of you who are interested will find there a detailed account of Aaron's personal and professional life as the creator of salutogenesis.
Thank you, everyone. This ends our recorded video, and now we will join you in live Zoom. So you're welcome to ask questions or made comments, and I wish you all a great conference. Thank you, Shifra. Thank you all.
Thank you, Avishai. Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot. I think this was really a very nice revival of this very, very, I think, personal dialogue Avishai and Shifra had together 3 years ago by now. And I'm really very happy that both of them are here today live, at least by video, but still fully live here, not only recorded. That's really a wonderful opportunity, I think, when to get also in more direct dialogue with the two of you about Aaron Antonovsky. I mean, I saw this video certainly already before several times, and I'm always again touched how nicely or well you really, give a very personal insight, which really brings Aaron Antonovsky more alive by your different perspectives on the same person from very different, certainly, life experiences you went through yourself. And I think it really shows how Aaron Antonovsky was a very modest man on the one hand, very approachable, on the other hand, a very engaged man who also really engaged for society and political issues, and still found time and found it very important to have enough time for his personal developments, but also the family life, which was evidently very important to him. So with that, I would like now to invite the audience to give any comments or also certainly questions towards Abishai and Shifra about what you heard here, or also whatever you already wanted to ask about Aaron Antonovsky in your engagement of the salutogenesis theory and also what you learned up to now about Aaron Antonovsky. So the floor is yours. Yeah, Wendy?
Hi, I would absolutely love to know. Burning question and an opportunity to ask. I love that in Antonovsky's books, he refers really generously and openly to how he has been influenced by the theories that he was aware of that were working at the same time. My question is, have there been theories that have become prominent since that you, as people who knew and love him, have thought, oh my gosh, he would have loved this theory and how it relates?
Well, thank you, Wendy, for your words. I think I would like to point out what you seem to be aware of, that he always said that his theory does not compete with others and is not better than others, but it blends in with others. For example, Kobesa's hardiness theory and Bandura's theories. I I don't know if there's a specific new theoretical model that he would have said, this is perfect. I would love to be involved in it more. I think there have been theoretical developments all over the salutogenic umbrella, whether it's Bandura's theory, whether it's others. I think maybe one thing, which is, I don't know if it really developed as a theory, called fortigenesis. Fortigenesis by someone who's I can't remember his name right now, from South Africa. He took the term salutogenesis, and he took it more into psychological world. And he was a good friend of my father's, and they were discussing it, and it was developing together until my father passed away, and it kept on. So I think he would have liked to be involved in that. I can say that one of the things he did not like was, I mean, he was once, I saw in a couple of places, people had called him the father of positive psychology, which is both, I think it's wrong when you check the facts, but he didn't like
the term positive psychology because positive psychology is too prescriptive in his eyes. So he would definitely be involved in all and search for many more theories. I am not aware, maybe others are, of any specific theoretical model that that would stand out.
Great, thanks for the concise question and answer. Any other questions or answers? Or also, I mean, someone else, maybe from the Global Working Group or beyond, wants to add to this question of other important theories, which would be in line, or yeah, Margaret. You're muted, Margaret. So
perhaps a resilience theory is one that is often linked. And there's a really excellent chapter by Maurice Mittelmark. Actually, we could probably put it up on the STARS website because it compares salutogenesis and resilience. And really, I think the main difference that that Maurice highlights is that resilience doesn't have a cognitive element. So like the comprehensibility and sense of coherence, that's kind of lacking. There's no cognitive aspect to resilience, but otherwise he finds many similarities in the two theories. So, yeah.
And I mean, as you now mentioned, also chapters in the handbook. I mean, also Shifra wrote a chapter together with someone else about the comparison between salutogenesis and positive psychology. So I think Avisha still, I think positive psychology, I mean, you know much better what he might have thought about it, but at least has some aspects which he might have liked, which are in line, I would say, with salutogenesis. And I will probably say more about it when I come to my own presentation later today. But certainly, I mean, also as by the term itself, psychology, positive psychology is more focused on the psyche, and salutogenesis certainly is more three-dimensional for all three dimensions of health.
Yes.
Yeah, Shifra.
What is very important to remember is that Aaron didn't consider himself as psychologist, but as sociologist. And all the time, our encounters were that he is the sociologist and I'm the psychologist, and what is the exchange between the two disciplines. Anyway, I think Aaron was very open to new ideas. He said he's very open. I have here a citation of him. It is wise to see models, theories, constructs, hypotheses, and even ideas as heuristic devices, not as holy truths. And this was his conviction, and that's what he would tell us if we ask him now about all the developments that are now going on.
I would just like to add for Wendy and for others who may be interested, the person who developed the idea of fortogenesis, whom I forgot his name before, is Professor Dios Trumfer from South Africa. Dios Trumfer, who I think passed away a few years ago.
Hey, thanks. Any other questions or comments regarding this theory development? Or you can also certainly now share other thoughts, insights, or also questions you would like to ask to Avisha and Shifra. Yeah, Bengt.
Yes, I would like to point out what we have been thinking in the Global Working Group for Salutogenesis, and this is the question of how do you create coherence? And we are actually much critic about sense of coherence is that it has been very individual. Now we are actually aiming at community and society, and we are on the way, but it will take a while before we have it fully sort of connected. But we have a model and a thought that has been built by several of us into something that could be a compass for salutogenesis for the future. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that also thanks for bringing this up, Bank, because this also relates back to the background of Aaron Antonovsky being a sociologist and bringing this concept of sense of coherence again to the society level. I think is a very interesting and fitting development. Absolutely. I don't know what Avisha and Shifra, do you want to comment on that idea? Applying this idea of coherence not only to the individual orientation towards life, but also to collectives and even society at large.
Aaron was a sociologist, I told it before, and he was very strong in his identity as sociologist. So all the time he explained to me what are the determinants of the sense of coherence. But what happened is that the sociologists created a very individual concept, which is the personal sense of coherence. But and that's what we talked also about this, and he was very offended that he was very much admired by psychologists, but not by his friends, his colleagues, sociologists. And I think he would like very much the development of the social sense of coherence, and I think we are doing it in the last decade. We are talking about national sense of coherence, community sense of coherence, and we are developing these ideas. And I think Aaron would love it, wherever he is now.
Yeah, I agree with Shifra. The when he died, it was sort of the development of the family, a sense of family coherence concept. And what come later, as Shifra mentioned, the community sense of coherence and national sense of coherence, and other offsprings as well as measuring still on the individual level, but children's sense of coherence. I think I see Professor Malka Margalit is here, who developed the idea of children's sense of coherence, and Georg, who took it to organizational or work sense of coherence. I think Aaron Antonovsky would be fascinated by all these offsprings, certainly.
Great. Thanks a lot, Avisha.
I would add something
Yeah.
about the family sense of coherence. That we have a lot of talking about it because I offered it as my subject of my dissertation. And he asked me, okay, you are talking about sense of family coherence, where it is located. And I think I told you, I see your smile, where it is located. So I thought about it a lot. And then I asked him in return, where is the sense of coherence located? And then he agreed that I will do my dissertation. I will write my dissertation about the sense of family coherence. And he was really excited for this.
Great. Yeah, it's somewhere in the system probably. So we have 3 more people now, or 4 actually, showing up hands. I try to keep the order. Theodore, you were next.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think to the coherence, it's important to see dynamically, that is, there is a coherence regulation in multidimensional, in individual, family, society, and global. And so these different dimensions are interacted, yes. And so we have to see it dynamically. That's, I think it's my view at it. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks, Theodore. Jake, you were next.
It's a question for Shifra. So thinking about some of our colleagues who are doing research on salutogenesis in doctoral supervision, salutogenic approaches to supervision, and also mindful that the way we are supervised usually determines how we supervise later in our lives. Could you tell us a little bit about what it was like to have a supervisory relationship with Antonovsky?
Wow. I can talk about it 1 hour, but but I will try to be very short. First of all, he gave me, before he invited me as the coordinator of, he looked for coordinator of his big research about retirees' sense of coherence and health. And when he interviewed me, he gave me to read the proposal, his proposal, and when he interviewed me, I told him, okay, it's very interesting. What do you think? He asked me about the proposal, the research proposal. I think it's very, very interesting and very challenging for me. But I told him, I'm a family psychologist, family therapist. And then I gave him, and you forgot that this is the family who retires, it's not the individual. And he looked at me, okay, continue. And I continued, and then I came back to home and told my husband, forget it, I will not be accepted. You can forget my job there and my doctoral. And then after one day, I got the telephone, come and work with me. So this one example of how he relates. He always wanted me to challenge him, to challenge what he writes, to challenge what he thinks. And we have such a dialogue between psychologists and sociologists. And that was the way that he supervised me. And I hope I do it too. I supervise like this my students. Some of them are here, so you can tell by yourself, themselves they can tell. But the difference is that I have always group of doctoral students that they always exchange between themselves also the ideas of the, and I was the only one, like you, Avisha, you were the only son, and I was the only one. But I really, my life was changed with this encounter with my supervisor, Aaron. Supervisor, and then colleague and a good friend, Aaron Antonovsky.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Shifra. It's really amazing how you describe this mutual learning and exchange and thriving by this exchange and really developing or detecting new perspectives and so on. Thanks a lot. Marta, you were next.
Thank you, George. Thank you for this history moment. It's really precious. And I'm fairly new to the group, and perhaps this has been answered maybe, but I thought I would put it out there because I haven't seen it yet. Has there been any history of relationship with the cultural diplomacy work, since he's so interested in peace studies, particularly health culture diplomacy?
I'm not sure, Shifra, if you can refer.
Can you repeat your question?
Yes. There's a lot of work coming. There's an institute in Berlin, for example, and we've done a lot of work here in the United States on cultural diplomacy, health culture diplomacy in particular. And I wondered, with his interest in peace studies, if he'd ever merged somehow the work with that. That's my interest. That's my interest.
No, this was we didn't speak about peace in the laboratory, unfortunately. But later on, I started to speak about peace and the conflict, and I combined it with peace. But with Aaron, I spoke a lot about peace and about our activity, how to promote peace. But this was separately from the oratory, from the scientific work. Unfortunately, because he had a lot to say about it, but he didn't combine it. Also, he was very much insistent that not to combine values with the scientific work. Not to connect our values with the scientific work, to be so-called objective, but we cannot be objective. That's what.
Which is why I asked my question, because diplomacy allows us to do that. Yes.
Yes, but we were together on Saturday all the demonstrations and all the activities of peace activity. And if I didn't come one Saturday to the demonstration, on Sunday morning when I came to work, he was very angry. Where have you been? But this was completely separate from the scientific work. But I think differently, so I combined it together somehow.
Thanks a lot. Also, Martin,
also wrote about it a lot.
I believe that if he had lived 10 or 15 years longer, he would have been involved in peace studies as well.
Yeah. Okay, very.
Maybe. I all the time think what he would say about what our situation these days. So when we talked to Avishai about did he find the right way to live the world, I think he found the right way. The right day to live the world.
Okay. Yeah, I think this is also why this topic, what Bengt mentioned before, of coherence becomes so prominent also in our global working group, that we really need to think about health beyond the individual, but really on this collective, truly collective level, and how different people with different ethnic and other backgrounds really can live together in a more peaceful and certainly also more healthy way. So thanks a lot also for all these thoughts. And Marta, I don't see you anymore, but if you would like to share some more of your thoughts around this concept, which I must say I'm not very familiar about it, we do have a blog on our website, STARS website, where we invite people also to write a blog on a certain topic, which might be intriguing to other members. So please visit our STARS website and suggest such a blog entry if you want. And now, as the time is nearly over, I will give over to Shimon, who had raised a hand for a while, and that will be the last question, just out of time reasons, sorry, before we enter the break.
Now, first of all, thank you, and it's really great to be part of this celebration of the life of Aaron Antonovsky. It's nice to see Avishai and Shifra. I want to add a couple of dimensions and related to some of the questions that were raised. I was a medical student of Aaron Antonovsky in Be'er Sheva, and actually this coming year we're going to be celebrating the 50th anniversary of, I think, the first graduating class. And as I know it, Aaron came to Be'er Sheva from Jerusalem with a Professor Privas, who was more of a medical, authority on medical education, to really provide more of the kind of salutogenic psychological, psychosocial aspect to the training of medical students. I was fortunate to be very actually close to Aaron because we shared a lot of the political ideology, and also we shared the importance of not just the psychosocial, but to look at the biopsychosocial. So the first thing I would suggest to the question of what theory would he possibly be interested in, and this is a little leap, I think he would have been interested in some of the biological theories of what constitutes people's sense of coherence, especially theory of mind. I would assume that since he was so inquisitive, and in our discussions, they were really wide-ranging, from biology all the way to, well, you call it sociology. We talked about, political ideology, religion, things of that kind. I would think that he would be very intrigued by the development with neural networks and the sense of coherence of these new, essentially, agents that we're still trying to understand. So I think that would be an important focus for him. In terms of some of the discussions about sense of coherence, and I'm glad that the STARS is going in that direction, I had some communications with him about religious ideology as a central part of people's coherence and how it changes over time. I think one of the big issues, and it would be interesting to examine, is what happens to people when they have a strong sense of coherence or a sense of coherence, and then events change that. We're seeing that in the US right now with the new leadership, a new kind of whole conceptual change. We see that in Israel, where people who grew up on a certain ideology are confronted with a society which is going in a direction of essentially going back in time to religious fundamentalism. I think he would have been very intrigued, and actually he did write to me in an exchange about the importance of trying to understand why some people who have a very, very strong sense of coherence, as do the Israeli ultra-religious nationalists, how can we really think about that philosophically? Is it not important to create a sense of coherence? And what happens if that sense of coherence is something that's very abhorrent morally to what we believe? So in general, I think that, and this is a question to Avishai and Shifra and anyone else, it seems to me that a central part of the early years that I knew Aaron was translating what his ideology and research were about into clinical practice, which is essentially what he came to Beersheba to do. And I'm just wondering if you're aware of some of those efforts. How would he have thought about it? And what happens when he was exiled to sociology of health instead of staying in the medical school?
Okay, thanks for sharing this also personal insight of encounters with Aaron and reflection you had with him, Shimon. A brief answer by Shifra or Avishai?
Maybe Avishai?
Yeah, I agree, Shimon, that there's also biological, even at the cell level of what creates sense of coherence and so on. But you mentioned neuropsychology and neural networks and brain functioning. I think he would be fascinated by that with or without a connection to salutogenesis. But now that we know much more about how the brain works, we know how much we don't know. But I think I agree that he would be fascinated by that. And on a separate or the same, maybe it goes together, more clinical work, which is a question of whether a sense of coherence can be used in clinical studies or clinical work. So the whole issue, I think, would be very, very relevant to his thought. I would love to talk about it some more, but another opportunity because time is short.
Okay, thanks a lot, Avishai, also for your impression of how he would have taken that up further. Since we are now already 5 minutes over the original plan, which is not too bad, it was a very lively discussion, so I think it was good to have that time. We still take a 10-minute break, Margaret, if you agree, and we reconvene at 2:05, and we still have enough time for this second part, I'm sure. Okay, so see you again in 10 minutes.
Get back to the program. So welcome back, everyone. In the second part of the program, what we're going to do is explore a little bit about what Aaron Antonovsky might think about the latest developments in salutogenic theory and practice. And we're going to have 4 short presentations, which we're calling tasters of some recent developments in salutogenesis. Because we're a little bit short of time, I'm not going to give very detailed bios of the speakers. I will just introduce them. You can go and look on the abstract because the detailed bios of each person is there. So the first speaker that we've got in this section is Avishai again, and he introduced himself. He's the son of Aaron Antonovsky, and Avishai is going to speak to us about, he's going to present to us on salutogenesis and first responders. So welcome, Avishai, and you could just share your screen with your presentation.
Hi, everyone, again. I'm going to share my screen, and I hope you see it now. You see it? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, thank
okay.
you. Okay, so I'm going to talk about salutogenesis and mental health of first responders. This is a topic that I believe Aaron Antonovsky wouldn't have thought of. One of the several applications that have been developed in the last 30 years since he passed away. So what does salutogenesis have to do with first responders? Imagine a firefighter's work. What is physically harder? Climbing 2 flights of stairs with 20 kilograms of equipment, or climbing 4 flights with 40 kilograms? The answer is quite clear. But what is mentally harder? Entering a burning building to save lives while risking your own, or standing outside a building safe from harm and hearing that one of your teammates has been injured inside without knowing their condition? Or maybe the loneliness and lack of belonging felt after being assigned to a new team at a fire station. Firefighters, like paramedics and crime scene investigators, are known as first responders. In the words of Allison McCullough of the U.S. First Responders Association, a first responder is any individual who runs toward an event rather than running away. Professional first responders, like firefighters, face mental challenges in their work, some of which may be traumatic and require prolonged and complex coping. It is therefore easy to understand why many first responders develop signs of distress, sometimes with post-traumatic characteristics, requiring support and treatment. This is often referred to as helping the helpers. Indeed, there are various support programs for first responders who have already experienced psychological harm in the line of duty. The scientific literature is full of studies on the effectiveness of such programs, but these are post-event treatments. Beside post-event interventions, there's a need for proactive measures to enhance the mental fitness of first responders. Mental fitness is a set of cognitive, behavioral, and emotional skills that helps a person or group cope with mental challenges. This set of skills resembles the sense of coherence components of comprehensibility, manageability, and meaningfulness. And indeed, measures of mental fitness were empirically found as positively correlated with sense of coherence scores. As part of my work with organizations that employ rescue and emergency teams, I've developed a process that empirically identifies various types of tasks: administrative and operational, routine and emergency, tasks that create different levels of mental stress and varying degrees of perceived self-efficacy. This is done by using a questionnaire that measures these variables for each task. For example, here are 3 items from a questionnaire designed for crime scene investigators with typical responses. On top, the variables: how much stress do you feel doing the task or in the situation? And how confident are you in being able to perform the task or in dealing with the situation? Now, on the left, we can see these items of lack of sleep, direct exposure to body parts, and a search for drugs at someone's home. This respondent gave a high mark for lack of sleep, a high mark of stress, and a low level of confidence. On the other hand, he responded 3 and 2 for exposure to body parts and search for drugs, which mean a low level of stress, and a high level, a high number of confidence. That means being confident in doing those activities. Now, how can we explain this? Because lack of sleep is no danger, it's not a mental challenge. Well, it turns out that these people were very well trained for dealing with exposure to body parts and search for drugs. But no one ever spoke with them about how to deal with a lack of sleep, what to eat before you go to sleep, when you should go to sleep, and what you should do when you're tired. So that's why it causes a high level of stress. Now, based on this, a mental effort scale is constructed, which sorts the task according to their mental stress and confidence ratings. This helps the organization refine and improve its training and mental preparation processes for tasks or for situations that are psychologically demanding. For example, in this case, the organization can have a talk or some psychoeducation about how to deal with a lack of sleep. This process is carried out using a salutogenic approach, strengthening the sense of coherence. This is achieved by emphasizing comprehensibility, manageability, and meaningfulness in the work of first responders. Here are the 5 steps of the process. First, collaborating with the organization's staff to create a list of 30 to 60 tasks, activities, and situations characteristic of the specific organization. Second, developing a situation perception questionnaire like the one I showed you to be filled out by the employees. Third, based on the questionnaire results, constructing a mental effort scale. Fourth, advising the organization regarding fine-tuning of professional training components that might be considered and delivering psychoeducational workshops with a salutogenic orientation, emphasizing the components of the sense of coherence. And finally, conducting research to evaluate the effectiveness of the process. More details and examples can be found in my chapter number 50, in the 2nd edition of the Handbook of Salutogenesis. And finally, regarding helping the helpers, it turns out I did not invent the wheel. While writing this chapter for the handbook, I searched through some old papers and found the following, which served as the opening of a lecture someone gave many years ago. And this is how the lecture began. In this lecture, I will attempt to apply what I call the salutogenic model that to a crucial problem that is often ignored: the conditions which facilitate the adaptive survival and fulfillment of responsibilities of those who work in the caring professions. Aaron Antonovsky, Sweden, 1989. I think Aaron Antonovsky would be proud to see how many directions the salutogenic model had taken since then, and we will hear about some more directions by the following speakers. So thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of the webinar. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Avishai. That was really interesting, and you well within time. Congratulations. We have a couple of minutes. If anyone has a burning question, we just have a short time after each presentation for questions, but all the speakers have said if you would like to take up an issue raised, please do contact them. So a long thing, but it's not a question. I see in the chat. Does anyone have a question that they'd like to ask about that? Jake?
So, and Avishai said right at the end, how do we help the helpers from a salutogenic perspective? Thinking about the polycrisis that other speakers are going to tell us about in a little while, and the incredibly limited resources that we now have. What is the major thing that we could do to help the helpers? What is that one thing that's going to make a big difference, Avishai?
I think, first of all, facing the fact that the helpers might need help too. For example, paramedics who suffer from secondary traumatization, or psychiatrists who treat trauma, treat PTSD. And so the double recognition of their need. First, the system has to recognize that this is an issue, and the helpers themselves must admit that they may need help at times. Not always, but they may need help. And I'm beginning a few studies in this direction. I think there's some literature about it already, but I think one of the challenges is to use language which is, they know what I'm talking about when I want to help them because I use more or less the same tools. But anyway, I think it's a very good question. I don't have a definite answer, but it is an issue that's developing now. So that's good.
Okay, then we do have one other question from the chat. Talking about neuropsychologist and the paradigm shift in medical education, and then the question is there any medical faculty which implements salutogenic organization, education, and health services as a whole? Do you know of anything like that, Avishai?
No, I do not. I'm not aware of it. If the if you're talking about a medical faculty in a university, medical school, I'm not aware of that. I know there are medical organizations who have this and that course on salutogenesis in context of education or health services. In the educational system in Israel, for example, I know they do use the salutogenic model, but I'm not aware of this Gestalt approach anywhere.
Okay, thank you so much. And we now need to move on to our second presenter, who is Prof. Adi Mana. And she is from the psychology department at Peres Academic Center in Israel, and will be presenting to us today on different forms of collective sense of coherence, such as sense of community coherence, sense of national coherence, and sense of professional coherence. So Adi, over to you.
Thank you very much. Sorry, I can't rename, I don't know how to do it, so my name is not Yosef Mana, it's Adi Mana. Let me share my screen with you. Just a minute. Okay. Okay. So thank you for the opportunity to be here. It is truly an honor for me, and today I would like to share with you some insights from both Schifra Sagi's work and my own, focusing on the concept of sense of coherence at the collective level. So the idea that the concept of sense of coherence should be broadened to encompass larger level than individual was proposed by Sagi and Antonovsky. They emphasize that the stronger the sense of coherence, the more likely the system, whether individual, family, or society, is to function effectively and survive. Groups with a strong sense of coherence tend to structure situations in a way that are more likely to promote individual sense of coherence. Furthermore, thus groups have the capacity to activate their collective resources effectively. Antonovsky also claimed that in the face of collective stressors, the strength of the group, rather than of the individual sense of coherence, is often decisive in tension management. Antonovsky defined a group with a strong sense of coherence as a group whose individual members tend to perceive the collectivity as one that views the world as comprehensible, manageable, and meaningful, and a high degree of consensus in that perception. So, okay. Maybe here. Antonovsky also acknowledged that by shifting the sense of coherence to a group level, this raised a new social, moral, and philosophical question. At a Congress on the Mental Health in Europe Families in Prague in 1991, he focused on the connection between sense of coherence and ethics and values, stating that a strong sense of coherence may be good for one's health, but it says nothing about what one's values are. He also claimed that when we broaden salutogenesis to include concepts other than physical health, we cannot avoid the moral philosophical questions about values and science. Therefore, he claimed that there are two parallel tracks of sense of coherence, the promise and the danger. In this short presentation, I would like to share with you several insights and findings that were based on the study of Shifra Sagi and myself with our college related to those two parallel tracks of sense of coherence. Those studies are based on research tools that we've developed to explore the concept of community sense of coherence and national sense of coherence as group-specific constructs. That construct encompasses the three core components of sense of coherence: comprehensibility, the perception that life within one community or national group, or now we develop the professional group, is predictable, safe, and secure, and that community or national group is familiar and well understood. The second is manageability, the perception that one community or national group is capable of assisting its members, is accessible to them, and effectively meets their demands and needs. And meaningfulness is the perception that one community or national group provides meaning to its members, offers challenges, and is worthy of investment and engagement. So, what do we know? What do we know about sense of coherence at the collective level from our study? As related to the first track of sense of coherence, the promise track, we found that sense of coherence at the community, national level, and also at the professional level, is the main resource that contribute to mental health of group members, mainly in time of national and global crisis. For example, we found the sense of national coherence was related to stronger well-being and lower general anxiety among sample in 10 countries during the COVID-19. Later, we found that sense of professional coherence was related to a lower level of anxiety among teachers in Ukraine. We also found that sense of coherence at the collective level and sense of coherence at the individual level both contribute to mental health. However, the contribution of sense of coherence at the individual level is higher. We found that sense of coherence at the individual level is more stable than sense of coherence in the collective level. For example, we measured sense of coherence and sense of national coherence along 2 years of pandemic in Israel in 8 ways, and found that while sense of coherence stays stable, the sense of national coherence decreased, especially among group members who had lower sense of coherence in advance. And as for the danger track of sense of coherence, okay, sense of coherence at the collective level is more available to groups with rigid set of faith, ritual, and values. For example, we found higher level of sense of national coherence among right-wing voters and among religious groups. In the context of intergroup conflict, sense of coherence at the collective level, the community coherence and sense of national coherence were related to adhering to the collective narratives of the in-group and rejecting the collective narratives of the out-group. Sense of national coherence and sense of community coherence were also related to less tendency to be in contact with the other, to adopt more strategies of competition and segregation. Okay, so to conclude, it seems that we cannot ignore the importance of sense of coherence at the group level as a salutogenic resource in maintaining health and well-being, especially in time of collective threat and political violence. But at the same time, we cannot ignore the strong sense of coherence at the group level could intensify the intergroup conflict and became a potential obstacle for peace process in conflict areas. It seems that now is the time to ask new and important research questions. Is it possible that group members who are living in conflict zone can have a strong sense of in-group coherence and at the same time accept the others and be ready to reconcile with the enemy, and if so, under what conditions? Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Adi. So again, we've got just a couple of minutes. If anyone has got a question or a comment to Adi's presentation. While waiting for somebody else, Adi, I've got something to ask. Do you think that you could apply some of these collective things relative to even bigger issues like, I mean, we're going to hear Jake on planetary health later on, but, you know, on climate change, because is there an in-group and an out-group relative to who's prepared to make adaptations for climate change?
I think it can be a very good idea for research, but we didn't do it.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Wendy, do you want to speak your question?
Sorry, I can. I was actually scratching my head, but I had typed it in. So how do we unpick the difference between comprehensibility, things being cohesive, and just the requirement to be compliant, or you know, to accept social conditioning and to you know, the conditioning that may happen from family or from society or from education, even being taught to be compliant and not to ask difficult questions, a lesson that I obviously missed.
I think it is the danger path of sense of coherence, because when we found that, for example, in a religious group, ultra orthodox group, the sense of coherence, also the individual, but mainly the community sense of coherence is stronger, and this was also the Aaron Antonovsky hypothesis that this will be the case, but we found empirical findings.
Thank you so much, Adi. So now we'll move on to the third presentation, which is by Georg Bauer, who has introduced himself already, and he is the leader of our global working group and the leader of the Center of Salutogenesis. So Georg is going to present on salutogenesis for surviving and thriving.
Yeah, welcome back. Why did I choose that topic? As you might know, Aaron Antonovsky himself suggested really salutogenesis as a theory to guide health promotion, and was making the point in this article that really health promotion should follow more a salutogenic orientation. So my argument is that basically the original salutogenic model is really much more a model of surviving and not so much about thriving, which really we would also need in health promotion. Why is that so? just take a look at this overall original full salutogenic model. At the upper right-hand corner, you see these potential stressors, which are really all quite heavy stressors, accidents, horrors of history, intercyclic conflicts, other conflicts, and so on. So real, very heavy stresses, which we need certainly to survive. In order to do so, on the left-hand side, we have with generalized resistance resources, so really resources which help us to resist something negative, which is really up there in the box. And that will lead to a better movement towards the ease end of the continuum. So looking at that picture, maybe the original salutogenic model wasn't so much a health promotion theory in the beginning. To make that point even more clear, I allowed myself to really condense the model into its essence. Certainly, it's very much abstract now, but it really shows the core. We do have this very famous sense of coherence in the middle, which allows us to identify resources, resistance resources to overcome these horrible stressors, and by that, moving more towards the ease continuum. So do we need to expand that? No, yeah. Let's just look at the very idea, as I said, of resistance resources. Again, resistance implies really it's something negatively valued, something which you want to overcome. But just look at the titles of the books. Originally, really, these are it's a coping model, really helping us to cope with more difficult, challenging situations. The same is true for the outcome. I don't think many people know looking at this ease end of the disease ease continuum, but this still has been very much negatively defined by Aaron Antonovsky in the sense really of the absence of negatively valued things such as pain, functional limitations, a negative professional prognosis that develop a disease, and a need for treatment also assessed by a professional. So again, it's not really the idea of health we would have in health promotion. When we look at health promotion, the field and the salutogenic orientation, which Antonovsky proposed, fair health is really defined as a positive concept, emphasizing social and personal resources in the Ottawa Charter. And also it says health is created and lived by people within the settings of their everyday life, where they learn, work, play, and love. And I always think, are these really situations which are well characterized by these horrible stresses we saw in the first model? Partly it can happen, but that's only part of our life experiences. So then I always had quite some dispute, I must say, with my colleagues in the Global Working Group, which do not fully agree, because originally Antonovsky said, well, he thinks that we are all always in a very dangerous river of life, and we really struggle for survival in this river of life, which certainly is one notion of life, which is sometimes happening. I don't want to diminish that at all. But then we can also maybe say that often we are also in the life where we really experience life as a river, where I really like my swimming and I really fully enjoy the swimming in the river, and I thrive even in it. And I had the big opportunity to ask this question to 18,000 employees in 35 countries, how they would really assess themselves. And you see here on this global study, 80% say they are really more in the middle, or even more towards the green side of this positive river of life. And so my whole argument is that we really need to complement the model to also capture this positive life experience. Earlier today, we also discussed what more newer theories Antonovsky would be maybe intrigued by and built on. And I think one very useful theory is really coming from psychology, the theory of approach and avoidance motivation, which really distinguishes clearly that there are negatively valued things, which I would try to avoid, negative stresses I really don't want to experience in my life. And there are positive things in my life, which I want to approach and experience more of that. And if we now apply that to resources, then I think really we can distinguish resources in two different functions. On the one hand, they do have this function, which was certainly postulated by Antonovsky, where they help us to overcome really this negative stressors. And by that, I really develop less of this disturbance of my health. So I move more to the ease continuum. But beyond that, also there are a lot of resources out there which just are good for me because they help me to achieve my life goals and also they allow me to grow, and not just only for resistance purposes, but in a value by itself. They really allow me to thrive. So I think here we need to expand this idea of resistance resources by also adding thriving resources. And then turning to the right-hand side on the outcome side, as the original continuum really stops at, let's put it in simple terms, in WHO terms, as at the absence of disease, we need to add an additional continuum, which is more capturing a positive notion of health, which I still like to call positive health. I again know many of my colleagues don't like that. But the real reason why is again referring back to this theory of approach avoidance distinction. Here we can now define very clearly, I think, and precisely negative health as the absence of negatively value aspects of our health, things which I rather don't want to have in order to at least survive. But beyond that, there are also really things which I value about my health, that I can achieve some goals, that I can make a contribution to society, that I have a feeling of well-being and so on. And that would be positively valued aspects, which I would call positive health. And the only reason why I use positive health, because health is really consisting or covering two very distinct aspects, with absence of disease and the experience of positive things. And if you use one term for both, you never know what to talk about. And this is why we need to make this very clear distinction between negative and positive health. And that would be the last slide. Adding that, then you would just slightly complement the original model by adding thriving resources to the resistance resource idea and having two continua, one about negative health, one about positive health. And I think that would really allow us to much more broadly capture the full human health experiences. Thank you.
Thank you, Georg. I must say, hearing this again, I am very intrigued, and I know I've been one of these negative people, but I'm going to go and read this again. So thank you very much for that presentation. I see Avishai has a question. Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Georg. Speaking of surviving versus thriving, the salutogenic theory was born after a study among Holocaust survivors, and it based on terms like the second law of thermodynamics and entropy. And I wonder whether this perception of whether if it should be a theory of surviving or of thriving is depends on culture. And I wonder, in your study, which was done in 35 countries, were there any major differences between countries or between cultures in your study, very generally?
Not at all. I even showed the range. So people really being in the positive range, this is really between 70 and 85%. So that's really across all countries. I mean, and this really included all continents of the world. So no, there are not so much differences. And again, maybe I was misunderstood. I'm not saying thinking about how to survive well is bad or nothing like that at all. I think it's just only capturing the half side of the salutogenic question, origin of health. And I would just suggest to add this additional question also what helps us to thrive. And certainly depending on the life stage and in which environment and culture and economic situation you live, the one or the other will be more prevailing, but we should never forget about either side.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We've got time for one more question if anyone would like to ask one. Yes, Wendy.
Sorry, I'm aware I've asked a lot, sorry. Is there a way within all of this that what is picked out is the personal response to having those resources that actually then leads to the outcome? Because it's easy to look at the original and then the what you've just presented from a objective point of view and miss that possibly the key element in it is the individual's response, the individual's perception of the stresses and the resources that they had that then leads them to act in one way or not to act in order to thrive. Sorry,
No, absolutely.
that's
But
what
I
I
mean,
was
this is
looking for,
why
hoping you'd found it.
why I left the sense of coherence in the center. I think that's still a core of the salutogenic theory, and that exactly would predict if I'm more capable of identifying resources and also mobilizing them. But according to the so-called broad and build theory, it also would imply that I even can build up more resources by, for example, approaching more people and enlarging my social network and so on. Absolutely. And here again, still the sense of coherence would play a crucial role for both paths, and that we could also already show empirically.
Are people inherently aware of their sense of coherence?
Well, I mean, it's always like that. I mean, it's called a global orientation towards life. So this is what people have by growing up within a society. And then the sense of coherence is just a way of conceptualizing that what is actually happening in real life. So one heuristic approach, as also Shifra said before, helping us to analyze this global orientation towards life. But that's by itself certainly a natural phenomenon happening within humans. Absolutely.
Thank you. Sorry if my question was naive.
That's okay. Thank you so much, Georg. That's really fascinating. And then we come to our final presentation, and this is by Jake Salloway Costello, and he's an associate professor in health promotion in the Division of Food, Nutrition and Dietetics at the University of Nottingham in the UK. Over to you, Jake.
Ooh, thanks, Marguerite. Just to confirm, can you see my slides?
Yes, we can.
A moment to speed up there for me. So, Pnawn da Gogledd Gymru yn y Deyrnas Unedig. Welcome, colleagues, and good afternoon from North Wales in the United Kingdom. I have the privilege of being our final thinker, tester, speaker today, and what an exciting topic to end with. We've heard about individuals, families, communities, societies, and now we take on the whole planet using salutogenesis and maybe even a little bit further. So we'll see how far we can get with that. I want to talk about planetary health and the application of salutogenesis to the world's global ecological challenges. Now, this term planetary health, many of you will be familiar with it already. It doesn't refer simply to looking after the Earth, the sort of traditional environmental understanding of the planet, but it means finding reciprocity with the Earth. That's the key thing in planetary health, finding a healthy relationship between the people and the planet, and that will ultimately require some form of compromise. This is a relatively new-ish kind of concept in public health, maybe from the last 15 years, but it has been explored extensively by Indigenous and First Nations peoples long before Western academia came to planetary health. I was challenged by my colleagues today to ask the question, what would Antonovsky think? Antonovsky and our lives overlap by only 4 days, so I never had the chance to ask him. But I've tried to put myself in his mindset by thinking about the end of his life when he was trying to convince WHO and other health promotion bodies to see salutogenesis as the missing theoretical link behind health promotion. And so I've been trying to think here about planetary health from the health promoting and the salutogenic perspective. The Ottawa Charter is a brilliant document, but ultimately it understands the Earth as ours for the taking. It describes the environment as a need for stability, but only for people to continue to survive. And I think actually the planetary health movement tells us the Earth is not ours for the taking. We need something bigger than that way of understanding our resources. And so the health promotion perspective is one of anthropocentricity. People come first. The Earth is ours to be used, and we need to maintain it so that we can continue to exploit it. But salutogenesis is about something much bigger. It's about hearing coherent agencies in the world around us, that the Earth is not just ours for the taking. We've got to think about the bigger picture. Health promotion is also ultimately a homeostatic theory. It assumes that we are going back to something, that there is some sort of stable equilibrium in life and health and society and disease, and that we need to move back to this. But as colleagues here have talked about today, actually salutogenesis is a theory of chaos. It's a theory about the world being a difficult, dangerous place that is always putting us at risk. And Gail just talked about the ultimate need for survival. And so I believe from a health promoting perspective, planetary health doesn't quite fit with what the Ottawa Charter was telling us. But ultimately, and this is where I am most interested, the Ottawa Charter tells us that health promotion is about taking control of the determinants of health. But as we've heard both from Antonovsky in his original text and colleagues today, not all of the determinants of health can be controlled, and nor should they be controlled. I think planetary health is one of those few examples where actually we have, as a human species, taken control of the determinants, and we've got it so badly wrong. After 200 years of taking control of the Earth's resources, it's making us sicker. In this sense, taking control of resources is a pathogenic development. And so I'm interested in not just taking control of all of the resources, but somehow learning to cope without them. Or when we can't take control, how do we cope in that absence? I think there's a mixture here of surviving and thriving. And so in the planetary health paradigm, I'm not so interested in planetary health promotion, but planetary salutogenesis, a term that we have firmed up and I'm delighted to share with you all here today. I'm not keen on reading from the slides, but because this is a working definition, we understand that planetary salutogenesis is a process. It's about creating and maintaining the sustainability of natural ecosystems and human well-being by strengthening the sense of coherence and finding novel relationships with resources. As I said, in salutogenesis, we're not just about taking control of all of the determinants of health, we're about understanding how we can cope with those that we cannot control, the unexpected challenges in life, in the river of life. Just some examples of what we're trying to do theorizing planetary health from the salutogenic perspective. We love to work with grassroots communities. We believe that the planetary salutogenic process has already begun. It's in action and it's happening all around us. Just an example to get us started here to think about the characteristics of planetary salutogenesis. We believe that there are three major characteristics of this process. The first one is that it's about everybody getting involved. This is a group that I have worked with here in the UK, in the north of England, Manchester, where groups are taking food that is destined for waste, that has been thrown away, and they're giving it to people who desperately need it for food security, trying to find some kind of reciprocity between the Earth's natural resources and the well-being of people. And what I draw our attention to here is that everyone can get involved, whether you are a public health expert or a health promoter or a medical doctor. In this grassroots approach to planetary salutogenesis, the best that you can do is turn up and eat, have a meal eating this food, or doing the food deliveries or giving it away. There's something really strong here about participation in planetary salutogenesis. We're also keen to see how we're taking those global challenges and turning them into local actions. Now, Georg said about that tension between thriving and surviving. And as he was talking, the first thing that came to mind, I wrote it down, was that planetary salutogenesis, to me, it means that we are finding global survival through local thriving. This is an example from somewhere I like to visit on my vacations. This is Encinitas in California, in the United States. And it was a concrete parking lot that was piling rubbish, garbage up, and it was a horrible misused space right next to the beach full of pollution. A group of activists have taken it over. They've turned it into a beautiful rock garden using environmentally friendly painting and art supplies, and they've planted native plants to rewild that horrible urban concrete zone. We're finding that people all over the world are taking on these global, enormous, overwhelming planetary threats and giving it local context. To this, we understand some sense of meaningfulness. And finally, an example here from Bundaberg, Australia, which is a turtle made out of trash taken from the ocean, where people are litter picking on the beaches and turning that waste into something meaningful. We, my colleague Claudia Maya Magistretti and I, we believe that planetary salutogenesis should be fun. It's acts of joyful creation, that these activist groups, as they're coming together, finding new meaning in their relationships with the resources and the earth and creating coherence in it, that the process should be very much fun. And so our understanding is that planetary salutogenesis needs to be participatory, localized, and it's got to be joyful. To end my talk, I wanted to think about what's coming next. This is a very, very early emerging area of salutogenic thought. And one of the next big things is that we are thinking beyond the planet. We are now thinking in the cosmos, cosmic health, thinking about how we can have reciprocal relationships with other planets, which we are keen to colonize, but also keen to look after, satellites, space debris. There is a whole world of healthfulness beyond our own atmosphere, which I think is fascinating. Firstly, we need a strong empirical basis for this. When we meet with our colleagues at the World Health Organization, they say, great, this theorization of local groups engaging in this process of salutogenic development for planetary health is fabulous. Where's the evidence? And we don't have it yet. We're just beginning to see it. Anybody on the call that is interested in this, we would love to see some empirical backing for our theorization that getting involved in planetary activism strengthens your sense of coherence. We also need a practice shift, an onto-epistemological change in health promotion, shifting our understanding of controlling the determinants of health to sometimes coping without them, and understanding that actually human control over natural resources may indeed be a pathogenic development, not a salutogenic one. I end here with my final call, which is for a need for coherent agency. Like many salutogenesis scholars, I am particularly interested in the sense of meaningfulness, which I also believe to be the most important. And I guess my end quote here is thinking about what it means to be a caretaker of the earth, not an owner of the earth. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much, Jake. Very powerful way for us to end. I see there are some comments. People have been reading things that it reminds them of hospicing modernity. It resonates with this. I can't. De Oliveira is the author, I think, and then biomimicry. Jane Benyus's work. And her recommendation to live in a way that makes life more livable for everyone and everything. And then Dr. Paul Pearsall, Deceased, Books on the Science and Art of Thriving. So I don't know if you've got any comments that you want to make about that, Jake. And then we've got a question from Avishai.
Sure. So the biomimicry one is a really interesting suggestion from Craig. And the idea that we can live better by looking after the planet, and not just that we're looking after the planet in order to survive. I do genuinely believe that planetary salutogenesis is about thriving. As I say, it's a process of joyful creation. It's about finding new meaning in looking after the earth that doesn't just mean looking after it so I can further exploit it. And so the biomimicry concept, looking after the earth to make life more livable for everyone with a strong emphasis on both quality of life and human rights, is absolutely essential. I fully agree.
Okay. And then Avishai, I'll just read yours. He says, speaking of cosmos, there's a salutogenic planning of the living quarters in a NASA space station.
I've only seen a couple of papers on this, thinking about planetary health in the beyond the planet. And obviously, as we are trying to create a theorization of planetary health using salutogenesis, why not? Let's use salutogenesis to talk about space as well. We are in a very rare position here that we're just beginning to explore other planets. Think about NASA's work sending the little shuttle thing to Mars and the small number of people who have visited the moon. We have a really rare opportunity to learn about how our failed relationship with the Earth, which has not been reciprocal, how we can learn from that and reflect and find a more reciprocal relationship with other planets. I think what a golden opportunity here to learn from where we've got it wrong. So yes, I think we should take NASA's work very seriously as salutogenic scholars.
Thank you. Brilliant place to end. And I will now hand over back to Georg to finish up the webinar.
Right. What a wonderful and powerful exchange that was, the whole webinar. I think we had such a nice insight into Aaron Antonovsky, and then certainly by you as participants with your questions, your lively suggestions also in the chat and also in the conversation. I think we really can see it's a really nicely developing field, and I very much hope that Aaron Antonovsky would be very delighted about this development. I would like to point out just a few points where you can further engage in advancing salutogenesis. On the one hand, we sent out through STARS a call for topics for an addendum for for the second handbook of salutogenesis. So we are looking really for new themes which emerge, which are not covered well yet in the second edition of the handbook. And as we don't want to wait for the third handbook in maybe 5 years from now, we make a call now and make an in-between small booklet which will fill this gap until the next third edition will emerge. So if you have any topics you find important, or even you might contribute yourself as a potential author, just write an email. You'll find this call on our STARS website. So that's one thing to engage. Anyway, I invite you to really join our STARS website regularly, because you always find new articles, new resources. The very most important, I would say, most recent one is really the lexicon on salutogenesis, really compiled by Margaret and others from our global working group, and really provides a very concise definition of all the core terms of the salutogenesis concept. And also actually we now installed that also even on Wikipedia. So I think for the first time we really have a comprehensive Wikipedia page on salutogenesis as well. And last not least, I would also like to mention that Bengt, and again, I want to really also thank that Bengt is here. Bengt is really the founder of our global working group on salutogenesis, and I think without Bengt, salutogenesis wouldn't be so alive, because he really did a lot of work in the Scandinavian countries and beyond for this concept. And he, together with others, put together now the second edition of the Hitchhiker's Guide to Salutogenesis. So if you move to the next galaxy, Jake, maybe you'll take at least this Hitchhiker's Guide along, which is very lightweight and still connected with salutogenesis. But that will be a very nice, concise publication, and certainly we will also promote it through STARS once it's out, I think in May next year. With that, we come to the end of this event, very much on time, also because I think Margaret also guided very well through for the second part. Again, I really would like to thank for all people who contributed by very lively presentations, discussions, also particularly also to Avishai and Shifra for really providing this very personal insights about Antonovsky and the whole concept. You got to know best for sure of all of us. And I really enjoyed this session. I hope we did well, really appreciating this incredible contribution Aaron Antonovsky made to all of us, to really this paradigm shift, looking more towards the positive side of health and how this can be developed, and really not only on the individual level, but also on the society level and even global planetary level and beyond, as we heard so well today. Thanks a lot for joining. And now I really would like to wish all the best for the coming holidays. And really, I think, first of all, a more peaceful world, which we all wish for and hopefully work for as far as we can do. Thank you very much for joining.
I would just like to add that I think Aaron Antonovsky is sitting up somewhere in the cosmos and being very proud and very happy and excited for the celebration, and he'll have a very nice and happy 101th birthday tomorrow morning. So thank you all.
Thank you.